Chapter 15. Michael. Michael looks at the reports on his desk, and another paper ends up in his inbox. He sighs and reads the form. What's that one? Cassiel is sitting across from him. It's a request to allow Beelzebub to meet with Nergal. Are you going to allow it? If it were one of your watchers on trial and you wanted to speak with them, I would hope the demons would say yes. Michael says, Beelzebub is the leader of Nergal's legion. Beelzebub is his host? Cassiel asks. Basically, yes, Michael smiles. What do you think I should do? I say you should let him. If there's a chance we win and he's destroyed, he should be able to see his host before he is nothing. His voice cracks, but he clears his throat. Cassie pets through the ears of his rabbit gently. That is very merciful of you, Cassie. Michael smiles at him brightly over the table's edge. Why do you think he deserves this mercy? Michael folds his arms over the paperwork on his desk, giving the other angel his full attention. Mercy is for the wicked, brother. Cassiel still looks sorrowful. But I would want the same benefit if Mathias had done this. You are correct, so please allow it. I shall, and I shall oversee it myself to make sure nothing untoward goes on, all right? If Raguel will let you. Cassiel almost smiles, but looks into his lap where a few small animals sleep in a pile, a rabbit, hamster, and a guinea pig. There's a small sort of yellow bird on his shoulder. Raguel hasn't an option with me. I am his host. Michael signs off and time-stamps the paperwork, then drops it in the outbox to hell. What about Phanuel? Cassie asks. Gabriel is his host, Michael chuckles. I can't think we would put both our lawyers under the same host, did you? Michael looks back through his paperwork, signing off on something else, dropping it into the outgoing bin. Cassiel looks away from the desk. You don't have to do this, you know. Do what? He's barely listening right now. He's got a lot on his mind. Watch me like I'm going to break, Cassiel mutters. That makes him look up and stop everything. That's not what this is. It isn't? Cassiel shrugs. I overheard Gabriel talking about keeping me occupied so I wouldn't be so upset. Michael frowns. I'm sorry. We didn't know what else to do. Another form pops into Michael's inbox and he nearly disregards it. He sighs and grabs it up and sits back in his chair. They want you to testify. Me? Yes. Hell's barrister is asking for you. He lays out the form for Cassiel to view. I suppose I always knew that was going to happen. Cassiel takes the form in his hand and sighs. Okay. You're sure you're okay with this? Michael has to ask him. Yes. He nods gently. Michael turns to the side of his desk, lifts the receiver on his desk phone, and presses one of the buttons at the bottom. Get Raguel and Phanuel into my office, please. He nods. Thank you. He hangs up. Why? They will need to coach you on your answers. Isn't that deceitful? No. What I mean is they will ask you the questions they believe hell will ask you. And with them, you will be able to answer more easily and more readily. Think of it as trying out how to answer hard questions before you have to. Practice. Practice? Michael nods at him. When you put it that way, it sounds reasonable. Michael smiles. He needs Cassiel to do this. I'm glad you think so. Michael stops and looks across at him. Heaven would never ask you to be deceitful, Cassie. Okay. He attempts a small smile, but Michael can see this is breaking his heart. The trial resumes the next day. Michael, fully rested, is the first angel to arrive 1 hour before proceedings start. When he does, he notes Beelzebub and his lawyer are already there. "Are you ready to speak with Nergal, Your Highness?" "Not without oversight." The echo breaks off anything Beelzebub is to say, as Death appears on the high platform above everything. "Of course, you are welcome to stand watch as I do," Michael says. "Then come. You will have 10 minutes. Death motions the two to a door on the side of the courtroom. It opens, and Beelzebub looks briefly at Michael before turning for the door. Death vanishes. Michael follows Beelzebub into the room, and Death is already standing in the corner. "Boss?" Nergal is in his cage, but he stands up. He sees Death and Michael. "What's going on?" He bows his head. "Your Highness." It's brought up very last for some reason, and Michael watches perplexed. "You asked for me," Beelzebub says, standing beside the bars. "Didn't you?" "Yeah, He reaches into his pocket, and a sound comes from Death's shroud. "It's just a watch, sir." He shows it to Death and says, "I want him to give it to my daughter, just in case." Death comes forward and looks at the watch. It opens without being touched, and Death nods. "Is this acceptable to heaven?" Michael nods. "Perfectly acceptable to leave a child an heirloom." Michael looks over Nergal. He hasn't seen him up close. He's not listening to whatever conversation he is having with Beelzebub, because something has caught his eye. He walks up to the bars. Something behind the demon's ears makes him stall. "Nergal?" Death turns to him. "You are not at liberty to speak at this time. Just listen." Nergal is handing the pocket watch to Beelzebub, who puts it in his trousers pocket. "No, Death, you misunderstand." The shroud comes to Michael and towers over him. "Look, just there, behind his ear." Michael turns his head, lifting his hair to show the shroud of his marking. "He's a horseman like we are." Death looks him up and down, and Michael turns his head, pulling a few strands to show the shroud his mark. Death's face turns, and Nergal's hair moves on his head, unbidden. The horseshoe is unmistakable behind his ear, the same place where Michael and Beelzebub have their marks. "Pestilence!" Beelzebub smacks the bars. He steps away from the cage. "Fuck!" "What?" Nergal looks around. "What is going on? I demand you explain yourselves." "You are a horseman, and thus cannot be put to death," Death says commandingly, moving through the cage bars to examine the demon closely. "Your fate is not yet written." "We are the 4 horsemen," Michael says, looking between them. "War," he points to himself. "Death," the shroud. "Famine," he points to Beelzebub. "And pestilence." Nergal looks himself up and down. "You are the horseman that brings disease to the land." Beelzebub leans against the far wall. "What shall we do?" He opens his hands. "Because this isn't going to look good if we just stop the trial now." Michael looks at Death. "Nergal cannot be put to death, so what are our options?" He looks at the door. "What do we say to everyone?" "I must check death records for a moment." Death looks between them all. "Do not leave one another. Stay here." He vanishes. "That's just fucking grand," Beelzebub yells. "Come back here." "Your Highness, please." Nergal turns to Michael. "You said disease?" He blinks and looks at the door. "Does that... You're sure?" "Yes." Michael nods. "It's the only one you can be." He motions to Beelzebub. "Famine is what will happen if Beelzebub's true nature of gluttony takes hold." He nods. "I will bring war." violence to the end times. I did it, Nergal says softly, looking at his own hands. It was me. Does this mean something to you? Beelzebub asks. You act as though this explains something for you. My daughters, children, well, they die young, he frowns, from sickness, and he shrugs. Is it me? Nergal looks from Beelzebub to Michael. Am I killing my grandchildren? It's quite possible, Michael nods. Until death returns, there's not much we can do. Jesus Christ, Beelzebub sighs. What do we fucking do? You need to calm down, Michael says firmly. How can I, when heaven wants him dead and they can't have what they want? Beelzebub frowns at him, and damn if Michael doesn't want to kiss him, even as angry as he is. They'll want my head next, and they can't have that either. We just have to let the trial go on. Death is ultimately the one who will call their judgment. Michael shrugs. Maybe we do this dance, go through it, and then maybe death lets him off. I killed an angel, Nergal says. If death were to let me off, heaven wouldn't accept it. You're probably right, Michael agrees. I didn't mean to kill him, Nergal says kindly. It wasn't supposed to end like that. Yes, well, you killed, and we can't kill you in return for it. God has plans for you. Michael sighs. For all of us. Beelzebub sighs. You're the demon of the fig tree, he says softly. A plant elemental. Yes, sir, your highness. I thought that was my lot in life. But I'm killing people. He nods, and his head bows low. He lifts his hand and holds out a fig. He looks between them now, faces pale. Beelzebub takes the fig into his hand and stares at it. Michael comes around the cell. What are you thinking, Bee? Your Highness is his title, Angel, Nergal says. You will respect him. Michael can't respond before Beelzebub speaks. He does respect me. He may call me what he wishes. Michael swells a little with pride at that statement. 5 years from today, Paris, Michael says softly. 5 years from today, Beelzebub agrees. What's that supposed to mean? Nergal asks. Your Highness, what is he talking about? Before they can answer, Death reappears. We, as horsemen, overrule heaven and hell in judgment. We can decide. He motions between them. We can make the determination, and it can stand due to our status. Heaven cannot know I'm a horseman, Michael insists. They'll lock me up, hold me hostage. It's why I've never once said, and I'll keep my mark hidden. Lucifer knows about me, and no one in hell knows about Nergal. Those that do are in this room, Beelzebub admits. Death, what do you think we should do about this? We let him escape, the shroud says. But it must look good, and you must be able to part ways when we leave this place. I will bear witness that you both intended to stop him. He floats to the cage. Brother. Death opens the door. Flee. Do not be found. Do not return to your daughter. Fill this place with vines, wrap us up, and you're going to have to harm us a little bit, Beelzebub says. Make it look good. Do some damage. He takes his jacket off, tears the arm from the coat's body, and tosses it down. Michael nods and undoes his tie a bit. He reaches back, pulling the elastic band out of his hair to shake it out, using a hand to rough it up. "Death, could you do the honors?" he says. "Bruise us up." "I will, but be warned this will cause a rift between heaven and hell for many years. You will have to be torn away to avoid suspicion." The shroud comes to Michael and touches his face, leaving a bruise, and Michael winces. A force pushes into Michael's chest, and he groans, nearly dropping to his knees. Michael turns his head, meeting Beelzebub's eyes. "We know," he rasps out. He watches as Death motions Nergal into the open. "You will go here." He touches Nergal on the forehead. "I will meet you," seeming to impart a location without saying where. "That's not very far." Nergal looks between them. "Are you sure?" "It will be. You were for me, will be for me, are for me," the shroud says. "Thus you will meet me there." Death wraps his bone-like hand around the fly mark on Nergal's arm, and it melts off like liquid, replaced with a skull. "I take you as one of mine, as my right." Nergal rolls his neck and reaches into his pocket, pulling out seeds, acorns, and figs, tossing them down on the ground as if sorting them, before keeping hold of a few saucers in his hand. "Redwood ought to do it, with some kudzu and more vines. Yes, jungle vines." Death nods. "Once it starts, vanish," he insists. "Best get on the other side of the room, Archangel. If they find you two speaking, the sides will have questions." 5 years, B, Michael reminds him. 5 years. Beelzebub agrees. Death forces Michael across the room, slamming him into the wall. "Now, Nergal." Death's voice echoes. Michael slides to the ground, holding his side contorted in pain. Michael barely can hear anything. His ears are ringing, but plants are filling the room. Vines snake around him. He summons his sword to fight back the growth, to look like they're attempting to stop it. Michael scrambles to his feet, still holding his side, chopping at the long vines. Death is gone. Somehow he vanished when it started. Beelzebub is almost out of sight at this point. Nergal also seems to be gone. The room filling is faster than he can seem to keep track of. A tall tree in the center where the cell had been, and vines fill almost everywhere else. A demon making a garden seems so strange to Michael. But then again, everything has been weird since he walked into this room. Beelzebub is cutting his way through small patches with his daggers. "Michael!" "Stay there, B." Michael insists they have to stay separated, and with how thick the growth is, it might be a while before their people can dig them out. "Hell," he mutters to himself, as the vines snake around his legs and squeeze hard enough to break even angelic bones. He lets out a scream he can't keep hold of and drops to the ground. He can hear Beelzebub scream again, and his heart breaks.